everybody, and welcome to Inclusively. I'm here with my usual partner, Chris Lewis. And today we have two special guests from the Atos group. It's Neil Milliken, and he is the VP of Global Accessibility, the VP Global Head of Accessibility, and Antonio Santos, the innovation evangelist at the Atos Group. And we're going to talk about how we can improve the design of any products for the disabled community. However, before we get into that, as we always do, we would like to hear from Neil and Antonio who they are, what they do, and then we'll get going. So, Neil, you want to tell us who you are?
Thank you. Yeah, so I've been with Atos 15 or so years now. I'm responsible for accessibility across the group of companies, both internally in terms of policy and employee-facing stuff, but also externally in terms of how we deal with our sort of ecosystem and our clients and so on and so forth. So very much interested in how we can make our products and services more inclusive, but also working with other companies within the tech ecosystem to help them help us be more inclusive as well, because in old school terms, we're a systems integrator, and that means we're working with lots of other people's systems. We knit them together. We provide them as a service to lots of other organizations. And as part of that, we need to be thinking about how we can do this in a way that everyone can use them.
Antonio.
I think to the context of our conversation today, it's important. I started working in telco in 2000 in a Portuguese telecom called Optimus, and I was working on special projects and customer services where we were trying to find ways to use new technologies to improve how we to improve customer relations, and even to discover new possibilities of the services available at the time. So and then I ended up later around 2006. I ended up working for Siemens Mobile, and then I stayed there while the company existed, and then I moved to other area of Siemens, who in 2011 became part of Atos, and that's so since then I work for the group in different areas. I work in digital workplace, digital transformation initiatives, and try to understand how to help customers to collaborate and how to improve their day-to-day activities and internal and externally through new technologies.
What a perfect pair of guests, I think. And Neil, I think you should also touch upon your podcast you've been doing. Is it 11 years now, you say, the podcast on Access?
We're in our 11th year. Antonio, myself, and an external partner, Deborah Rue, we have been running a podcast called Access Chat, and a community online that has brought together lots of people around accessibility, innovation, and inclusion topics since 2014. So we're in our 11th year. Something like over 1 million posts on social media relating to the hashtag, and about 500 interviews. So it's been really interesting way of learning about different aspects of inclusion. So like you're doing here today, you're finding out a bit about what we're doing. Our curiosity has led us to invite lots of people on so that we could learn from them as well, because I think that accessibility over the years, whilst the recognition of it has grown, was very much still a niche topic within many organizations when we started 10 years ago. And so the best way for us to learn was to find other practitioners and connect them together.
And I think that you've hit the nail on the head, haven't you? There's lots of pieces of work being done on the subject, but it's been very much in isolation across different parts of businesses, very little consistency. Is there any, or where would you say we are? And obviously we're thinking about the telecom industry, but perhaps you can start just talking about industry as a whole on building accessibility into companies. Is it where are we on that journey? Have we done well over the 11 years? Are we just starting? Where would you say we are?
I think if you take an optimistic view, you could say we've made significant progress. I think that there are a number of large organizations now, a significant number where you don't have quite the same sort of number of small initiatives, that there are recognitions that there need to be programs or offices, and that there is, there are corporate roles in accessibility. There is a recognized accessibility profession, and there are certifications for that. So I think that has certainly progressed over time, and the number of people taking those certifications has also significantly increased. So it's recognized that it's a profession and an occupation, and that it is something that businesses need to do as part of their work. And then I think that the less mature part is the understanding that this is a strategic topic. There's a few companies, mine included, where the roles are truly seen as strategic. They're part of the strategy. They're looking at the entire transversal aspect of accessibility across business. But I think that is something that is coming more and more, and that there are drivers for that in terms of the regulations and so on that are coming, and they also impact the telecommunications industry.
So is that
the thing here about the current situation? There is all this kind of trend against the DEI that is started in the US, but it's kind of seems to be spreading in other countries as well. Do you think that is going to be a deterrent, or might not have an effect, or even encourage things? How do you see that?
Right. So if I may, I think that there's a couple of different strands to this. So there may be areas around disability inclusion in terms of how organizations report about their external impact and projects. So maybe some of the sort of performative things, like changing the color of your logo for different weeks might disappear. There may be the renaming and reframing of different initiatives, but accessibility in itself is a legal requirement, it's a technical requirement. So to a certain extent, it's always been semi-detached from some of the other DEI initiatives. It's certainly something that is dealt with separately in procurements and requests for procurements, etc. So there is still very much a need for this, and a need for this to be professionalized. Yes, there is some politicization around the topics of disability and DEI, etc. So I think that like with many topics, you have a sort of multi-speed approach on these things. Different areas are going to advance at different rates, and also in different geographies and cultures. So I think that you can't just say, well, the political climate has changed, therefore it's going to be deprioritized. I think that with things like the European Accessibility Act, organizations are going to be forced to take it seriously. They're going to have to act, because this is a market access directive. And that means that if you don't make your products and services compliant with the EN regulation, the EN standards, then you actually can't get a CE certificate, and that means you don't have access to the European single market. So regardless of what your political views are on this, if you want to sell in the market, you have to do it.
I think it's important to note that in many organizations, people working in accessibility are not that many. Some organizations might have one or two people work on accessibility, and this work can be quite isolating. So people are basically working internally to their processes to make sure that the whole company is compliant. They're trying to somehow looking for advocates and people that can help, that can support them make products and solutions accessible, and reinforcing once more. This is a feedback that we got through our conversations to our peers on Access Chat. This reinforce it can be a very isolating work when you work in accessibility in an organization. Some organizations are more mature and they might have teams who are very well structured, but other organizations might just have one person that is trying to solve all the problems that organizations might have.
And where does that person or those teams sit in your experience? Because we did an interview with Salesforce, for example, who have a very highly placed small group on accessibility and inclusion, whose job is to educate the rest of the company. That is sort of sponsored all the way down from the all the way down from the CEO. Are you seeing examples of that where this is becoming not so isolated, to your point, where it is actually seen as being strategic within companies? Is that something you're seeing more and more?
So we have seen the growth. So like with Salesforce, like with Microsoft, within my own organization, we have, it's a senior exec role. It's proximity to the group management is extremely close. So we run accessibility from our general management, and that means it's transversal. So like the functions for IT and for HR and for housing and logistics, etc. So
it has visibility across the company. Is that what you're
does
saying?
have visibility across the
Yeah.
company. It certainly, that's progressed significantly over the years. Obviously, HR is a much larger organization than accessibility. IT is still much larger, of course, but there has been a growth, and there are different types of roles. So I have legal counsels working for me on regulatory advice. We have technical specialists. We also, are running various different projects, as well as having the deep accessibility specialists. There's a number of different initiatives that are run from the center, and then you have so it acts as the hub, and then you have the spokes, and you have the educational processes and everything else. The companies that are doing this are still very much in the vanguard. They're the early adopters of sort of proper accessibility management. I think that then the next wave behind that are companies that have some accessibility functions, but there is still a high reliance on contractors. So there are quite a lot of accessibility expert organizations that supply in services to business. And certainly they're serving organizations. And then the final bit, and I think you alluded to this before we came on, is that actually a lot of organizations and a lot of telcos have foundations. And so they're doing a lot of disability inclusion work from their charitable foundations. Now, undoubtedly, there's a lot of good work going on in these foundations, but it's not embedded in the mainstream of business. And so I think that it's important to look at what can be done to move that work and move that understanding of the importance of accessibility as a business topic and not as a charitable one.
And do you think that is because, my theory is it is done like that because the vision impairment community, of which I'm part, was always dealt with by charities in the vision impairment sector, and the technology was designed around individually, and the fact is today the technology is much more generic. We're using standard phones, standard computers with adaptation in software, so it's not dedicated technology that's done. And it's becoming more designed into the overall product and service development cycle, and then, so it's not so much an add-on thought. It's really part of the mainstream development. Is that a fair comment, or is that thinking too far ahead?
Well, I think there is a lot more inclusion of assistive features in mainstream products. That's been a continuing trend over time, but that's not necessarily done in a coordinated manner.
No, that's true.
And you still, and this is where governance comes in, because you need to be able to track, and we've been doing a lot of work gathering information on other people's products so that we can track and manage this, because even within large organizations and large software houses, they don't necessarily keep track of all of the accessibility features in their mainstream products. because it's quite hard to do and they've got relatively small teams. So because we're having to manage these kind of applications on behalf of other people, we're putting in that effort because we're the sort of orchestrators, if you like.
Yeah.
But that other point of your question around the models of disability and the mental models, maybe some of it's a legacy from the visual impairment charities, and maybe because they were the organizations that were most powerful and litigious, actually, in terms of pushing for regulations and legislation and the enforcement of them, that people made the mental connection and then put some of that work into the charitable model. But I think some of it is down to the societal models within organizations. Where does society see accessibility and disability? Are they still using the medical model in country, or are they using the social model, or have they moved beyond that to the biopsychosocial model of disability, which recognizes, yes, you need to remove the barriers, but yes, impairments and long-term conditions can, independent of whether or not you have a supportive, inclusive environment, still have an impact.
Yeah.
May I say something here? Oh, sorry, Antonio, go ahead.
I would say if we look at the perspective how telcos relate with their customers on the day-to-day lives, I think that currently they are struggling with digitalization and the more common use of people doing activities on telco websites than in the past. I think they are struggling with customer journeys. So what I mean by that, I mean, if a customer goes to a retail shop of a telco for an interaction, for a service, if later that person goes home and later calls the same telco over the phone to try to continue to have the same service that was requested in the retail store, there is no continuous. So the person in the call center might not even know that this person was at the retail store asking for a specific service. So this is influencing everyone, every customer with or without disability. However, this may even impact more people with disabilities than the other users, because you really need put a lot of effort in order to have your services delivered. Also, if you go to any most retail stores in Europe for telcos to have a service, I would say that most of them will struggle to handle an individual with a disability that directly goes to the store to request a service. Most employees might not know how to handle that person. They might not know how to deliver the service. I think that is still a reality of our days.
Well, and I guess this sort of ties into what I wanted to ask earlier, is that, and this is also linked to the charity model, is that you see disability as a sort of a limit condition. It's just that a few people happen to be disabled and we need to help them, instead of considering the fact that there are different types of abilities. There is a continuum out there, and that it should really be part of what everybody does. So yes, you might have special features, but you also want to have a sort of general different approach from the ground up, rather than adding features on top only. Do you see that changing, or do you think it's necessary?
So I think that there's a few things at play here. There's cultural differences. So, and also I think that we can learn a lot from organizations that are focused on aging populations. So,
Right.
for example, Orange have a bunch of physical stores, and whilst many of their customers would not consider themselves to have disabilities, those stores are serving older people and they are selling, assistive devices and add-ons and peripherals for telephony or connectivity that are essentially accessibility aids, but they're aimed and marketed in a different way. They're considered to be silver tech or whatever.
Yeah.
So I think that and that's a multi-100 million euro market in France alone. So there is a significant market there, and some of it is down to the framing of how we deal with this technology, because many of that audience, many people as they age, they acquire disabilities, but they may not consider themselves to be disabled. So the mainstreaming of features and the marketing of them as things that just make it easier for you to do the things that you want to do creates better engagement, higher adoption, I think. And then you've got the different companies that are then also marketing this. I think that some of the hardware manufacturers have done a really good job. I mean, especially if you're a hardware manufacturer that also has the integrated operating system and the entire ecosystem. Apple, for example, they do a great job on accessibility, but and then what you see online is lots of articles saying, "Hey, there's this great feature / life hack, which will make your life so much easier." And what you find is that they've discovered the accessibility features and that they're actually beneficial for larger cohorts of the population than had originally been designed for.
But I
I
think
think, and
that's an area where telecoms could have an opportunity to enhance customer experience, because telcos are not talking that much about accessibility on Android or accessibility on iOS. If you visit most of their websites, no, you won't find much about it. I think there's an opportunity here for telcos to step in the way they support users, uh, to take better advantage of these features. When someone buys a new phone, when somebody has a question, I think there's an opportunity to enhance customer experience in this sector.
there is, and in fact, I just bought some of the new AirPod Pro 2s with the hearing aid feature built in. I bought them in America because they weren't available here at the time. And I think that's a great example of the consumerization of technology where, hearing aids that would cost £5,000 plus, you're getting not the same, obviously, but something very similar in a headphones that cost a couple of £100, which is great, And actually, I was just thinking as you were both talking, and thinking, actually encourage, especially the elderly, when they begin to struggle making phone calls, and they begin to feel isolated. There's plenty of tools available to them, but who tells them about it? Because I think the hearing impaired community is exactly the same as the vision impaired. That there is a certain point when you accept when you accept you're visually impaired or hearing impaired, and the degree to which the impairment exists is different for everybody. Because I can certainly speak from experience of being very stubborn about accepting any label of being visually impaired or partial sighted or blind in my own vision journey, shall we say. So I think there's some great crossover with consumerization. I think you're right, Antonio. It's that packaging things up, but I think the biggest discouragement is websites and apps and how accessible they are. And I think that we see a lot of discussion about, we've been through it, we've checked, our website is perfectly accessible. Well, it may be technically accessible, but it's not usable. And I think I'm hoping all the different acts and the regulation will push us towards more usable technology, whether it's through an app or through the website or through voice. I think that's the other side of the telecom world that we tend to ignore. Is actually some people would still rather talk to, whether it's to a person or to a machine as they evolve and get better. So I think there's many pieces moving in the right direction. But once again, it's about educating the people with an impairment as to how they can best get access to the service and use the service. And then within the organization, whether it's within a telco or within any of the other companies you work with, or within Atos, how do you spread the word and how do you keep that going? But Antonio, I have a question for you. Given your job title and this the evangelist for innovation, I mean, does accessibility get considered enough in innovation, or is innovation seen to be other things, doing clever things for other markets, and then accessibility is an afterthought?
I say, talking in relation to what I do, accessibility is something at the core of the initiative that I try to take and bring, but it's usually something that comes later, or sometimes it comes because someone in the team relates with the topic. As a personal story, as a personal reason to do it. That's something that is still the case when we talk with our guests on Access Chat. Is, oh, I'm doing this, I'm developing this because I had a personal story, a parent,
Yeah.
or a family member, a brother. Um, but I think as we move forward, I think we cannot separate accessibility from innovation, as we cannot separate sustainability or cybersecurity. They need to be at the core of in every innovation initiative that you try to implement in your organization.
Good. Yeah. And Neil, I guess that we think, and often Monica and I talked about this on many discussions, is do you believe it's true that by designing things more inclusively, everybody benefits? Or do the disabled community benefit disproportionately? I mean, the way we design, let's say, contact centers or collaboration suites or whatever, or the applications that get used within companies, if we have accessibility considerations in that design process, does it generally seem to be making life better for everybody?
I think it will make life better for a lot of people. I think that when we say if you make something accessible, everybody can use it, that's actually not strictly true, right? So, because different disabilities have different use cases, different needs, etc. But when you design something inclusively, you're also trying to make it easy to use, easy to understand. That's likely to create successful transactions, whether that transaction is financial or completing a booking with your doctors to get an appointment. All of these things have a benefit to the organizations that are doing the work to make them more usable and accessible, and they benefit a much wider audience than just the supposedly small number of people with disabilities.
And it does occur to me that the way, you and I started talking about this, I don't know how many years ago, at least 10 probably, but
Yeah.
certainly the way that we originally designed websites, and we just threw more and more stuff at it. So they're just I mean, obviously I can't see them, but they just seem to be incredibly cluttered as far as I can see. And in terms of the getting things done, we simply design is better. Oh, do you see in the way applications are designed, and I'm thinking especially here about websites and collaboration tools in particular, that are you seeing any evidence that they are getting designed more inclusively, that they're getting cleaner, simpler designs, or the whole Teams, Zoom, WebEx environments are just still way too cluttered and too, yeah, they discourage communication.
So yeah, I think that when you develop a new thing from the ground up, it tends to have relatively few features, relatively few users. There's not a lot of noise. It's easy to use. The temptation with all technology companies, especially ones that are wanting to make revenue, is to add new features to make you upgrade, and so over time you add complexity into these things. So we went from having instant messaging to Teams, which then had lots of different channels and a sort of insert of a corporate social media, and so you've got nested areas of information and silos of information, even within an app, and you've got hundreds and maybe thousands of notifications, and it becomes very complex to use. On the other hand, you've got the sort of almost opposite approach in terms of some of the devices that we use, where they hide everything. They oversimplify, and then you've got an interface where you're meant to sort of intuitively know that if you wave at it or you sort of mark your finger in a figure of 8 and tweak your nose, then something magical will happen. So I think that sort of oversimplification of the presentation layer to users, right, can be a problem, because there's an assumption that you're going to know how to make that gesture. I mean, even though I know on iOS that you can drag down for notifications, and then you've got a control center, actually working out where in on the screen that I need to make those gestures. I repeatedly fail, even though I have the knowledge, where actually a visually driven menu for me would mean, yes, it doesn't look as nice, but I'm less likely to fail. So I think that there are these considerations, and there is no one correct answer to this stuff. I think that the answer that is going to be appropriate is the one that works for the most people, and you test with people and you include people in that design process, and you include people with disabilities in that design process.
Yeah.
And I think that in terms of collaboration tools, this is quite a problematic issue, because many of the solutions that are in place today and many of the companies that deliver workplace solutions for communication, they have done different acquisitions from different. No, Zoom is an example. We have acquired an external entity, an external company for collaboration that they have to integrate on Zoom, and then they realized that that solution was not accessible. There are other vendors in the market who also made acquisitions, and now they have to embed the software and those tools within the main suites. I think we know that Microsoft did some very interesting work with Teams, and one of the reasons that I believe they are being able to get an advantage is because they somehow, even if they're not perfect, they have accessibility at the core of the services, while others are still on the journey to understand what that will be. So, and if we have to collaborate today at the enterprise, organizations who are out of Google or are out of Microsoft solutions, they will struggle if they have users with disabilities who have to communicate using those solutions.
Yeah.
Okay, so our time is pretty much up, but I wanted to ask you a final question and sort of your closing thoughts on this. If there is one area that you can see where we can improve, where an area that we can either improve more or where there is more of need of improvement in telecoms, what would that be?
Antonio, you already started talking about it. Go on. The customer journey. Yeah.
I would say the way how you interact with customers, the way how you relate with your customers. I can give you two examples. Today, if you want to have the best services and have a kind of take the most advantages of your telco services, in many cases you receive a phone call, or your contract is about to end, and now we can improve and extend and lower the price. So sometimes people are not available to answer the call, or they don't really know who they are calling. They don't know if that person that they are calling has a hearing impairment. So that person is an older person that doesn't understand what they are talking about. So they lose on the opportunity of making a deal, and the customer is losing on the opportunity on having a financial benefit of the service.
So Neil, your thoughts, final thoughts.
Cross-sector collaboration is I think what's needed. The telcos are all trying to differentiate against each other, but there is which means that you get this sort of galaxy of different features and ways of working. And I think that whilst you do, of course, want to differentiate between yourselves and the competition, there are areas where people benefit from being able to understand how stuff works and that consistency.
I'm going to add one last question in, because I desperately want to get your views on it. So AI and MWC, Antonio and I were there, Monica was there, AI was everywhere. How do you see AI changing the accessibility landscape? Is it back to your interface, Neil, that you talked about earlier, that will change the interface? Agents will do more things for us. Where do you see the biggest impact of AI on the accessibility landscape?
So it's powering tools. I mean, let's face it, AI is not new. Machine learning has been the thing that's powered a lot of assistive tech for a long time. I think the speed at which it's getting better, powered by other AI models that are helping learn and acquire less common languages, is a good example. I think that conversational computing is going to be revolutionary, and I don't think we're there yet. I mean, we have the allure of it. You know, we've been able to shout at Siri for a long time, and it tells you something incorrect back. I'm picking on Siri now, but any of the
It's
other
good.
AI tools are
Yep.
the same. And I think that getting something that can actually really have a spoken conversational dialogic interaction with human beings that enables you to configure services or to have a customer experience would be really significant, because you know, you don't have to think about pressing buttons. You may not get it right first time. At the moment, we're reliant on humans to do that. You phone up the customer service representative who can understand the nuances. It's not working to a script. It's being able to ask questions back and really get to the heart of the matter. And I think that those things there's a promise of them at the moment.
Yep.
With AI and agentic AI. There's also lots of issues in terms of how much should you trust, where does the data go, and what happens when something goes wrong, and the explainability behind the AI. But that's an area where I think, you know, if I was able to properly have a conversation with my computer, I'd be able to get a lot more done.
Antonio?
I think there's a, at the Mobile World Congress, there's a kind of a FOMO on AI. It's almost like everyone had to have AI somewhere to make sure that everyone would understand that, oh, we are doing something on AI. So we are at the edge of what we need to do. I would like to go into two different things in a kind of a simple way. I would say that AI can support people with certain disabilities to be more present. What I mean by this: write blogs, create content. It facilitates content creation, or even to refine the content that they create. So I think AI can allow more people to participate in the day-to-day activities, over their dialogues, though to express themselves. On the other hand, AI can help us to make the content that we produce on a day-to-day more accessible. What I mean by this is subtitles, captions. You can do it quite easily today through running through AI in a way that you cannot do it in the past. It's not perfect, but today you don't really have a justification not to create a video with subtitles. There's no way. You cannot justify that. The technology is everywhere. The same apply to alt text. Now, even if you are a native English speaker, you are able to use AI to alt text an image. And if your website if you are managing, if you are communicating in English, is not perfect, but is able to do a better job than you, who might not have the overall vocabulary to describe that image as a non-native English speaker. So, and then I will resume myself to these topics here.
And I must, just before Monica closes, I should tell you I've been playing with various AI tools recently. One which comes from a company called Envision, which is a smart glasses company, and actually the ability for me to tell it that I'm blind, and its responses are then phrased around me being blind. It's so useful. It's so powerful. To the extent where it made a comment to me in a conversation thing the other day saying, "Oh, I've got to go off and watch some football. Oh, sorry, no, you're blind. I've got to go and listen to some football." So I think we are right on the edge of something extremely powerful in there. But Neil and Antonio, I knew it was going to be a great conversation. Monica, close it all down.
Yes, it is unfortunately time to move on, but thank you all for participating, and thank you all in the audience for listening to us. I hope you found it useful, and if you did, do subscribe to the Inclusively feed on your podcast platform that you use. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.